I really wanted to record this podcast because I was going through this in a book of mine of what happens to our bodies in a month. And it's such good information that so many women are missing and don't actually know what's happening in their body in a month.
Yeah, it definitely was a mystery to me until I was like 27, 28 years old.
And it's something that I definitely have to revisit and think about and be reminded of. So I'm excited to share. And I hope that women get out of this, and men, if you're listening and you want to know what's happening in a woman's body throughout the month, because I think that's really important as well. So if you're a woman, you want to send this to your man, go for it. But it's really important in having self-compassion for ourselves, understanding body literacy. So I want to create an analogy where you're thinking of your bodily process throughout the month like a business. So your body is a very intricate system with smaller subsystems that are working together all month long, like running a business. So at the core of it are your hormones, and hormones are actually just messengers in your body. They deliver instructions to your cells to carry out certain functions to maintain balance. At the top of the hierarchy is the CEO, and the CEO lives in your brain, and it monitors everything going on in your body to create a balance and make sure that things are running smoothly. So at the beginning of your cycle, your hormones are really low, and your CEO in your brain notices that your hormones are low, and it issues a command to start a new cycle. This is the beginning of your menstrual cycle. The order is to prepare an egg for ovulation and build the uterine lining for a potential embryo, because that is really our body's goal with ovulation, is to create pregnancy. And when we don't get pregnant throughout the month, we get our period.
Right. And our brain is communicating with hormones. So we've got 4 hormones at play throughout the menstrual cycle: FSH, or follicular stimulating hormone, estrogen, LH, or luteinizing hormone, and progesterone. So there's this back and forth communication throughout the whole cycle between your brain, the CEO, and your ovaries. Do we call them the employees? They're the reproductive team.
Yes. So we see those feedback loops between the ovaries and the brain, which is the CEO I'm referring to as the hypothalamus, but that's not something you need to remember if you're listening. Just call them the CEO.
So they're talking back and forth, signaling back and forth. So when those hormones are low and the brain sends that first signal, it's triggering follicular stimulating hormone down to the ovaries.
Right.
So that is what stimulates multiple follicles to start growing at the beginning of the cycle. And then one becomes dominant.
Right. So your ovaries receive the message. So the team gets the message to begin developing follicles. They get to work and they start to grow your follicles. And one follicle becomes the dominant follicle, like you just said. Once this follicle reaches about 2 to 3 centimeters, it signals back to the CEO that the mission is complete and we're ready to go. So then the CEO gives the green light to drop the egg, which leads to ovulation, and that is the release of the egg into the fallopian tube.
Exactly. So they're talking back and forth. The brain sends FSH, the ovaries produce estrogen, the brain sends LH, and then that follicle ruptures and releases an egg.
Yes. So this is ovulation. This is what's happening around day 14 to 15 of your cycle, roughly. It's different for everyone, but that's generally around when it happens. And what's really incredible is then your body creates an organ from the dominant follicle, and it does this every single month. And this organ produces progesterone and estrogen, which is crucial to support a fertilized egg. So it begins to signal the production of progesterone from this organ begins to signal back to the CEO that we're good. We don't need to grow any more follicles, so you don't need to send any more of the follicle stimulating hormone.
Right,
and we're set.
Ovulation can only happen one time per cycle.
So if fertilization occurs, meaning a sperm and the egg meet, the egg develops into an embryo, it attaches to the uterine lining, and that would be pregnancy. If not, that temporary organ that was developed dissolves and hormones begin to drop. You get your period, which is just the shedding of your uterine lining and the releasing of the egg from your body.
It's a miracle.
And then the cycle begins again.
So really, that's why your bleed is the beginning of the cycle, because we're shedding, we're starting over. It's kind of like a misnomer because period seems like, oh, it goes at the end of a sentence, but really, it is the beginning of the cycle.
It is. So as you can see here, ovulation is the main event, and it's really not just about reproduction. It's a reflection of your health.
And there are actually several different reproductive biomarkers. Obviously, bleeding is one of them. You want to have a healthy bleed, but we also see cervical mucus changes throughout the cycle, and other signs could be unusual bleeding, cramps, headaches, fatigue, and those could reflect other hormonal or health issues. So anything that's happening with your body during your cycle is not just an annoyance. It's a sign of something that's going on with your body.
That's why it's so important to know this stuff and not see it as an annoyance, because when you do understand your cycle, you can understand your body and understand your well-being. And it's a connection to your body and to your state of health on a deeper level.
Absolutely. It's such a huge mindset shift, especially if you're someone that's been on hormonal birth control for such a long time and suppressing these natural hormonal cycles, or if you've suffered from PMS for a long time and you see all this stuff as a negative, it really does wonders to shift this into a positive and see it as literally your fifth vital sign. There's a reason why your doctor always asks you when your last menstrual cycle was, because it's a vital sign.
Yeah, I really don't like when I hear women being like, oh, I have my period. I'm like, what do you mean? Oh, it's so beautiful. It's such a great thing. And maybe that comes from, I was without my period for so long, and it was all I wanted was to get my period because I wanted that vital sign. But I do hear a lot of women complaining about it. And I'm like, no, it's such a good thing.
Yeah, I laugh at myself sometimes because I almost look forward to it now, whereas before it was something that I dreaded. I didn't have my cycle for a long time, even when I wasn't on hormonal birth control. And at the time, I saw that as a good thing because I was dancing and it was like, oh, I don't have to deal with this. But now it's like, I almost can't wait for it to come every cycle.
I love getting my period, honestly. It's my favorite part of the month.
People are going to think we're so weird.
I know. I know.
Well, I kind of mentioned cervical mucus. It's important to know that the changes and fluctuations in your cervical mucus are a direct reflection of what is going on with those hormones. So the FSH, the estrogen, the LH, the progesterone, as those hormones are fluctuating and hitting those trigger levels, that is what is causing the texture and appearance of your cervical mucus to change. So that is why it is such an important biomarker if you're tracking a natural cycle.
Right. So we just went over what is happening in your body throughout a month and what you can expect your body to go through as it ovulates, sheds, and then the cycle starts over. We're going to talk to you about breaking down what you might feel and experience as these things are happening inside your body biologically. So starting with the menstrual phase, because that would be day one of your period, would be the beginning of your cycle. So in this phase, your hormones are the lowest. Like we've said multiple times, your body is shedding, it's releasing. And here with your low hormones, rest is really key. You might notice low energy, you might not. You might feel a little bit more reflective and introverted. Different parts of our brain are lit up by different hormones. Our ways of thinking are definitely impacted at this time. And I like to think of this as our inner winter. And a more introverted, going inward, a little bit more nourishing to ourselves and needing a lot more sleep.
Rest is so important. You also might feel more intuitive. The veil is a little bit thinner at this time for us. So it's a really good time to do some journaling, some reflection, maybe some thinking ahead of like what you want your life to look like, even in just the next cycle, in the next 28 days.
I definitely noticed that I'm deeper during my period. Like I think about things in a deeper way, a little bit more intuitive. Just the concepts of the way I think changes. The menstrual phase is anywhere from 1 to 7-ish days. And then you'll enter your follicular phase. The follicular phase is whenever your period ends until ovulation. Your hormones are now rising. That was kind of what we talked about, the CEO beginning to send those hormones down to the ovaries to grow the follicle. That's what's happening. So your body's preparing for ovulation. And in this phase, you might feel more energetic, more vibrant, more motivated. It's a great time for more activity, productivity, and socializing.
Yes. Also a great time for planning and scheduling. Make these phone calls, schedule my oil change, my doctor's appointment, my dentist appointment. At certain times, it can just feel like dread. Try to do it during this window of your cycle because your brain is primed for those kinds of tasks.
The follicular phase for me is harder for me to stay on schedule because I'm a little bit more creative in this phase. So I just want to like color outside of the lines a little bit more instead of sitting down and grinding workout.
Totally.
And then once you hit ovulation, the egg drops, you're in your fertile window. So this is, again, the main event. If you want to have a baby, this is the time to do it. This is when the sperm and literally do it. This is when the sperm and egg can fertilize and embed into your uterine lining. And some might feel sexy, confident, social. You might also experience, depending on how hard your body is working to ovulate, a little bit more fatigued or some mild symptoms a day or two in this ovulatory phase.
Yeah, this is when sometimes people feel those middle schmers cramps. You might feel a little cramping on one side as the egg is being released. And the egg is only released once, right? We already talked about that. So it only survives 12 to 24 hours. But we should remember that you're fertile for longer than that because of the cervical mucus. So something to be aware of.
Next is your luteal phase. At the end of your ovulation phase, this will begin and it will end when your next bleed starts. So progesterone takes over in this phase and it begins to lower your energy a little bit more. Progesterone, if it was an archetype or a person, would be a nurturing, feminine type of person. Like I imagine progesterone as like a woman picking berries in a field in a long white dress, like just flowy, feminine vibes.
And progesterone is supposed to like keep you feeling good through the luteal phase because you've had like this estrogen high. It's got your energy up, like you're feeling good and sexy as you ovulate. So if you are somebody that like totally crashes with PMS before your period or like feels like crap, that is a sign that your progesterone levels might be a little bit off because you shouldn't be feeling that way. We have this amazing hormone called progesterone that not only keeps us feeling good leading up to our bleed, but does so much for our body in terms of brain health and bone health and immunity.
It's also sometimes referred to as the sleepy hormone. A lot of us might be feeling that sudden crash or not feel great during PMS because we're so conditioned to go, 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 go. But if we lean into the feelings of progesterone and allow ourselves to slow down and be a little bit more feminine and flowy, which we don't often do because everyone's working jobs and has a million things going on. So we don't really have the luxury of leaning into it. But if we could lean into it a little bit more, it would feel really nice because it's slowing you down.
I actually think of the luteal phase in 2 acts because it's usually around 2 weeks, like 12 days is like minimum that it should be for like quit progesterone. That first week after ovulation, your energy is probably a little higher because the estrogen is still dropping off. Then as the progesterone really takes over, that's when you're really going to feel that slowdown effect in that week before your period. It's just important to be mindful of that with your energy, because that's when we can really get hard on ourselves about not feeling like we're showing up for work or social events in our full capacity, but it's because you're not supposed to be.
This luteal phase often makes us slightly more critical. So I always advise people to, in the luteal phase, write down your feelings and keep it to yourself until you bleed. You can go back to the journal and figure out if you want to act on it.
Mm-hmm.
But your criticism lens can be somewhat heightened in this phase. So it's important to take it slow and not act impulsively.
Yes.
That's where
Not
the
all
PMS.
luteal phase thoughts are rational, I guess we
Yeah.
could say.
Yes and no. I say they're not all rational, but I do think the luteal phase brings things up and out that we might be suppressing all month long, and it just needs to come out. But I think that's where the tool of writing things down and not acting on it until we bleed comes from, because it's a good way of reflecting and saying, is this something that has been nagging at me all month long that I actually do need to address? Or was this something that was coming up for me because my critical lens was super heightened and I was being impulsive?
Yeah. Like your bullshit tolerance is like at its lowest.
Exactly. And then we talked last week about birth control. And just as a reminder, like, you can see here through this picture that we've painted of what happens to you all month long and the way that you perceive life and the lens through which you perceive life through happens to change with our hormones.
In a previous episode, we talked about hormonal birth control, how it affects your body, the side effects. So when you take the information that we just shared today about all of these fluctuations that your body is going through in a natural menstrual cycle, it's a stark contrast to what's happening when you're on hormonal birth control, because that's the worst lie that we've been fed, is that hormonal birth control regulates our hormones. That's not true, because it's just shutting them off and replacing them with synthetic hormones.
The CEO's signals that it's trying to send to the ovaries to start that production and begin the ovulation phase is blocked by the hormones. It doesn't allow those messages to come through.
Right. So the function of birth control really is to block ovulation in most cases. Sometimes it's just thickening the cervical mucus to create that plug, that barrier, so that sperm can't get through. But I think the biggest issue is blocking ovulation, because, like we said, that's the main event. Ovulation is what triggers progesterone, which is not just important for feeling good before your period, but also for your brain health, your bone health, your immunity. Why do older women suffer from osteoporosis at such high rates? You know, if they've been on hormonal birth control their entire lives, they have not been getting natural progesterone. So there is just a lot of natural processes that are totally being shut off.
And your period that happens on birth control is not a period. You don't experience a true period. That is a withdrawal bleed as you're withdrawing from the synthetic hormones that come from the pill. When you take the sugar pills, because you're not taking the birth control pills, you have a withdrawal bleed. But it's not a period. It's not the breakdown of the corpus luteum organ. It's not the shedding of the uterine lining. It's not sending that feedback loop back up to your brain and regulating your bodily processes.
Yeah. And like we talked about in the last episode, that those sugar pills, the placebo pills, were never an original function of the birth control pill. They only put it in there to trick us into believing we were still getting our periods. And you probably know or have done this yourself where you just skip those sugar pills and go straight to your next pack because you don't have to take them.
Yeah. So if you're interested in cycle syncing, but you're on birth control, unfortunately, that's not going to happen because of these biological processes that have to happen in order for your body to go through a cycle. If you are blocking those signals from the CEO, you're not experiencing a cyclical month. You're experiencing the same thing every day. And that creates more of a hormone function similar to what men experience, because men have a cyclical pattern as well, but they experience a 24-hour cycle instead of a 28-day cycle. So women sync with the moon cycle and men sync with a solar cycle, a 24-hour rise and fall. And men's hormones do typically rise and fall the way that we see the sun rise and setting, and women's hormones do follow a similar pattern as a monthly lunar cycle, which I think is so cool.
Yeah, I think that is really cool. You're not experiencing these highs and lows and fluctuations of your hormones if you're on hormonal birth control. But if you are interested, maybe you're not ready to come off of the pill yet, you can start to observe the moon and see, okay, we're in the new moon right now. The new moon typically correlates with the menstrual phase. If you know, the sky is its darkest, that's like your inner winter. So you can kind of start to see that, you know, shift in the skies with the moon and understand how your body is meant to shift in its energy, kind of finding that highest point at the full moon and then starting to taper off towards the next new moon. But you're, like you said, you're still not going to fully have that experience. And that's why so many women that have been on birth control for so long kind of start to feel disconnected and maybe a little bit dissociated from themselves because they're not having these natural hormonal fluctuations and they're kind of losing their natural connection to the way their body is supposed to function. And that starts to ripple through other parts of you.
Right. Because like I said, certain hormones and certain phases of our cycle throughout the month light up different parts of our brains. And it really is a lens through which we experience life. Our natural cycles are. And our natural cycles create creativity, vitality, energy. And we have these waves and these ebbs and flows. And when we're not having those cycles and those changes and those ebbs and flows, we're not really experiencing life through the different lenses that our body is meant to view life through.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if we're just thinking about how your brain function changes throughout the cycle and how like your focus and your strength kind of changed with a natural cycle, you're not getting that with birth control. So you're kind of missing out on like this magical part of being a woman. And I know that, you know, some people might be like, that sounds horrible. I don't want to be on a hormonal roller coaster all month. But you learn to appreciate the difference because you're not a man. Your hormones are not functioning like a man's. So it doesn't mean that you're worse off than them. It just means that you have different strengths and you can work in a different way. And honestly, like sometimes you can pull back, you can do a little bit less and then have like a really more productive spurt through your follicular and your ovulatory phase, and then give yourself a little bit of leeway to rest. And so it's less of like powering through day in, day out, and more of like working with your energetic fluctuations. And that allows you to have a little bit more creativity, more flow in your life.
Yeah, and just to give it like a little more of a philosophical lens, agree with me or don't, but this is my personal perspective that men and women weren't meant to be the same. I personally believe that male and female were designed to complement one another. And men really are the daily, steady, consistent energy. And women have their own strengths in our intuition and our ability to be cyclical, and we're able to mother or create. We're creators. We create life in our bodies. we birth life from nothing and we grow a life for a 9-month, again, cycle. And I think that's beautiful that we have different energetics.
Yeah, there's some peace to be found in accepting that as well, because I was grinding for so long on hormonal birth control, and at a certain point you just hit a wall and it's like something's not working for me. I realized like I'm trying to operate the same way that a man does, and that's just not what I'm meant to do. And then it's like, like I can like ease off, I can start to connect with myself, and then I become a complement to my partner instead of like constantly trying to like butt heads
and compete with one another. I feel like
Yeah.
that was a mark of my relationships prior to kind of leaning into my femininity and my ebb and flow. Was I felt like I was always subconsciously, it wasn't conscious, but competing with them, because that's what men do with one another. And so when we're like trying to be men, we subconsciously are like in this like competitive nature. And I don't know, I'm not competitive anymore, especially with my partner, you know?
Yeah. No, I for sure, like I brought so much masculine energy to my relationship during that time in my life. And it was the most tumultuous time in my relationship as well. And it's like night and day difference now. And I'm so much like more at peace with myself too. I think
Right.
it's so important for women to understand this about ourselves. Like for me, learning about this in my late 20s, I felt like it had been such a disservice to me to go up through, that a quarter of my life. I don't know if I'm going to live to 100, but, you know, to go that long not understanding this fundamental function of my body. We all deserve this body literacy.
For sure. Well, we hope that this podcast episode was informative to you. We hope that you can understand that your hormones have a deeper function in your biological process throughout the month in your cycle, and can have a deeper appreciation when you do get your period and when you are ovulating, and help this kind of be the lens through which you look at your body and your life through, and that you can use this information to connect deeper with your body.
Beautifully said.